Now let's work on letting a user create a new trip from our dashboard. So the first thing we're going to want to do before we create that view and URL and template is install Crispy Tailwind so that we can style our forms a little bit nicer. So I will have this linked, but we can just follow the instructions here. So the first thing is pip install Crispy Tailwind. Copy that and go back to our terminal. And we can stop the server and paste in that pip install. So now that that's installed, let's go back to the docs and check out what to do next. We want to add to our installed apps, Crispy Form and Crispy Tailwind. So copy those, go back to our project, and we can go into our project config settings.py, into our installed apps, which should be near the top. And we could say third party, and then paste that in. So Crispy Forms and Crispy Tailwind. Going back to the docs, the last thing is to add these to the settings to specify which template packs and template pack to use and load. So copy that, go back to our code, scroll down to the bottom of the settings file, and at the bottom we can paste those in. Perfect. So that should be all set up now. Now we want to go ahead and set up our trip create view. So we can close our project folder, go into our trip app views.py, and at the bottom create a class trip create view that will extend create view, which we have to import at the top. So next to template view, import create view from Django. So this will give us all of the basics to create a new object in our database. We just have to specify what model. It's a trip. We want to specify the success URL. Again, every time I do that shortcut, it is too much text. And it is reverse lazy, which we have to import. And then we specify where we want to go after successful creation. We'll go to trip list. So if you didn't get that from Django.urls, import reverse lazy. So then after we successfully create a trip, we will go to trip list. We have to specify what fields to include. We could pass in a list here, and we could say city, country, start date, and end date. And previously we've put all for fields, but in this case we don't want all of the fields, because if we look at the model for a trip, we also have owner, and that's a user. And we don't want the logged in user to be able to select the user from. That's kind of weird. We just want it to automatically be who's ever logged in, gets associated with that user. So that's why we specify these fields. And it will be looking for a template named model_form.html like before. So we have to keep that in mind when we're creating our template. But there's one thing we want to do. So we want to override a method on this create view class here. And that's the form_valid. And it takes self and the form. This will get triggered every time the form gets submitted to create a new trip. So every time someone submits a form with these fields, the city, country, start date, and end date, it will run this method, this form valid, and make sure that it's all valid information and save it to the database. And so we want to override this because we want to do something in the middle here. We want to have it be so that the owner field equals the logged in user. That's why we didn't include it in the field, because we want this to automatically happen. So we can say form.instance.owner. So form is what's passed in right here, the actual form instance itself. And then we could say the owner field on that form, the owner property, set it equal to self.request.user. So this form will have a form.instance.city.country.startdate.enddate. It's all the fields of the form. And so we're going to add a new field, owner, and we're going to set it equal to self.request.user. So just like in this function-based view, we were able to access the request.user right here. We're also able to access that from this self. And then we just want to return super form valid and passing in the form. So we're basically assigning this owner value to the current logged in user, and then we're going to call the form valid function again, but pass in this new form that has the owner on it now. So that's how that works. Next, we want to create the actual template named model form HTML, so trip form.html. So if we go over to templates trip, let's go new file. We'll go trip_form.html. First thing we want to do is extend, see if this will extends trip/base.html. Then we want to load Tailwind filters like so, which we just installed previously. Then we want to say block content, and this is where we will include our form. So we want to first include a h1 and say trip form, and then we can render out the form itself. Action, we can leave blank, it'll just submit to the current view. Method equals post. We can include a CSRF token for safety. We can render out the form here, but make it include the crispy tag so it gets rendered and looks a little bit nicer. And then we can put input submit, and the value is save. And we're going to also add class equals and include here some classes for the Tailwind styling. So we have a BG green 400, the background green 400, padding on the left and right of 7, padding on the top and bottom of 2, have it rounded corners. On hover, it'll be a cursor pointer, and on hover, the background will be green or 300. So that should be good for the template. Now the last thing to do is to hook up the URLs between the URL and the view. So you can go ahead and add another path, and this path will be dashboard/trip/create, and then we want to fire trip create view. Since it's a class, we have to call its .asView method. We will call it name equals trip-create, and then we can add a trailing comma. And this trip create view here got auto imported, but if it didn't, from .views, we also have to import trip create view. So now we can save that. We can fire back up our server, python manage.py run server. If we open it back up in our browser and go to dashboard trip create, beautiful. So now we have our trip form here. The city, we could say San Diego, United States, and then we can just save this. And now it gets added to our current logged in user, which is DJVAC, or whatever user you are logged in. And then if we log out and log in with the other user, in my case that's the test user, we don't see that newly created trip. Awesome. The last thing to do is quickly wire up these URLs so that they connect to the right location. So if we go back to our code, we can minimize the terminal. If we go into our base.html and we scroll up and we go into my trips, we can add an A tag here and just move that to the other side of my trips. We could make this link to trip list like that. We can just copy this A tag right here and paste it next to new trip and just add the closing A tag and have this link to trip create. So now if we go back to our browser, if our server is still running, and refresh the page, we should be able to go to new trip and see our trip form, and go to my trips and see all of our trips. Awesome. In the next video, we will create a detail view so we can actually click on a trip and see its details. See you in the next video.